What class is the strongest controller and therefore, arguably, the strongest character in all of D&D 5e? I'm not sure that it's a wizard. I don't even think it's a sorcerer. No, I think, actually, it just might be a bard. That's right, and a gishy spell sword bard, no less. Or maybe, more accurately, a spell whip? Anyways, today we're going to build one, so I hope you'll watch and see if you agree with me. Welcome to D4. Hey everybody, so here at D4, every week I take a deep dive into one specific character build for my favorite role-playing games. I like to crunch numbers about them, I like to theorycraft about them, not so that I can tell you the definitive right way to play this character, but to explore one potential way to build something in the hopes of creating a character that's both really fun, but also really powerful to play. So if you enjoy creating characters for your favorite role-playing games almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build something that you're thinking about playing, or if you just really like theory crafting, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I am so glad you're here. So thank you for watching. My name's Colby. Right, so longtime viewers of the channel know that if there's one thing I love in D&D and role-playing games in general, it's gishes, or spell swords. That term, gish, by the way, for those who don't know, comes from the original edition of D&D. The Githyanki race had a caste called gish, who were like fighter-wizard hybrids, right? And so people ever since have just used that term whenever referring to a martial caster hybrid character. Anyways, yes, I just can't get enough of the archetype, the spell-slinging weapon user. But with very few exceptions, I tend to build my gishes for damage, right? And yet, I think most people would argue that the best use of spells, we've gone over this before, or at least the most powerful use, the thing that's going to give the most benefit to your party in combat, is for control. Potentially shutting down a number of enemies in a fight so that you can take out, outnumber, and wipe out some of the bad guys while the others basically do nothing can really almost trivialize encounters a lot of the time, right? It's for this very reason that I've long said that the most powerful character I've ever built was, well, the Control Freak, the Enchanter Wizard here, or maybe a little more recently, the Clockwork Controller up here. Okay, so maybe that's true, but if it is, I think you could make the argument that sometimes just controlling the battlefield isn't all that fun. I mean, there's some inherent fun in feeling powerful, I suppose, but having played that Control Freak, at least in-game, I can attest that while it definitely made combat encounters almost stupid easy, it was also probably the most boring character I've ever played in-game. Cast a powerful control spell, hypnotize another enemy, take a nap while my allies do more interesting stuff, right? But lately, I've been wondering, what if we built a gish that was a control-first kind of character, who concentrated on controlling the battlefield, sure, but then in combat was still making weapon attacks that both did damage but also potentially snared or pushed or immobilized enemies. That just feels so much more interesting to me to play in-game, so much more fun. And great news, thanks to some changes to the 2024 rules, including weapon masteries and species changes, doing this in-game is easier and more powerful than ever. Ready to build it with me? Okay, I proudly present D&D episode number 204, the Quagmire, the Frostbite Flogger, Whip Flicks and Chill, the Cold Snap, that's a good one, Snap Freeze, also another good one, Song of Winter, I love it. Big thanks, as always, to all the people who submitted suggestions on the D4 Discord server for this, but I think I gotta go with the one submitted by There's No Race Like Gnome, such a great name, the Cool Whip. And yes, when you say whip, it's important to say whip.
Ooh, let me have some of that Cool Whip. What'd you say?
Huge thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he put together for the build this week. He does this every week. If you'd be interested in following Randall to see the other stuff that he's done, he's such a great artist. I'll put links in the video description, as always, on how to do so, where you could potentially reach out to try and commission him to create some art for your character or even your entire party if you'd like. Before we jump into the build really quick, I've got to tell you guys, I've got a bit of a bone to pick with today's sponsor, Hit Point Press's new book, Big Bads. See, I've kind of always thought that if I were ever to become a third-party content creator myself, I'd want to take like all of my favorite builds and put them into one big book and figure that people could either use them for their own character ideas or use them to make the like BBEG of their campaign, right? Well, Hit Point Press beat me to the punch. Dang it. But I'm not actually that mad at them because they are one of my very favorite third-party publishers, and this book, Big Bads, looks freaking amazing. I talked to you guys about it actually when it was in Kickstarter, and now it's published, it's ready for purchase, so if you missed out on backing it before, now is your chance to pick it up. Big Bads is a 2-volume collection of the biggest, baddest boss monsters for 5e. More than just stat blocks, every Big Bad comes equipped with full backstories, tactics, minions, and much more. You can use these bosses to build a campaign around or just like plug and play them into a one-shot, right? Inside the book, you're going to get 31 boss monsters from CR 5 up to 30, so for pretty much any tier level of play, right? Plus, the Creatures and Curios compendium contains over 200 additional monsters and magic items. You could throw down with a mischievous sea dragon, foil the schemes of a gelatinous kingpin, face down world-ending threats, or actually, my favorite thing, join the Big Bad Bureau to show the boss monsters who the real boss is around here. There's a BBEG guild that you can join. Come on, that's freaking awesome. So do yourself a favor and go check out Big Bads. When you do, I would really appreciate it if you would use the link that I put in the video description as well as the pinned comment below so that they know I sent you. Thanks for that. And thank you so much to Hit Point Press. I seriously love everything that you guys put out and really appreciate the support. Okay, let's get back to the build. Okay, at level 1, brace yourself. Yes, we're gonna start off as fighter here. Full disclosure on the build today. This build gave me fits. Seriously, there are so many things that I want to accomplish with the build to really be like the best control focused Gish, and we needed a few levels of a couple different classes to get us there, but we also needed 6 levels of Bard to make it all work. I went back and forth more times on things when creating this than I probably have on any build since the Pokemon trainer from the very early days of the channel. Anyways, among other things that we need to make all of this work, we need weapon masteries. As a caster using concentration for their potent control spells, we also really wanted Constitution saving throw proficiency. There is an argument here for starting Paladin for the weapon mastery. You get some other nice perks, lay on hands, smites, and maybe more importantly, you don't slow down your spell slot progression by going Pally, right? At least not with a single level. But one big drawback with Paladins is the 13 strength requirement for multi-classing with a Paladin. But worse, no Constitution save proficiency, right? By far the most powerful control thing that we are going to be doing is concentrating on spells like Sleep, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, Hold Person, and later Hypnotic Pattern, Fear, even Wall of Force, right? Where we can be controlling multiple enemies on the battlefield. Thus, protecting our concentration is, in my opinion, way more important than any benefit we can get from Paladin. You could start Sorcerer for the Constitution save proficiency and to stay full caster, right? But then you don't get Weapon Mastery. And the sort of core identifying feature of this build is going to be the way that we are using weapon attacks to control targets in addition to our spells. And the only class that gives us Constitution saving throw proficiency and weapon masteries with a single level dip is, yeah, fighter. So here we are. And hey, the other perks fighters get are nice too, so sorry, not sorry. For our species, we're going to be taking my new favorite, I think, Goliath, but instead of going the usual hill giant ancestry route that I tend to do, we're going to go with Frost, because a Goliath with a Frost giant ancestry gets to proficiency bonus times per day, add a d6 of cold damage to an attack, but also reduce the target's speed by 10 feet until the start of our next turn, and thus begins the deep freeze. For our background, I'm really going to encourage you to customize a background as per the Dungeon Master's Guide, or take an old background like the 2024 Player's Handbook says you can do, and just decide which ability score increases and origin feat that you can use, if at all possible. Because none of the backgrounds that were given in the new Player's Handbook give me both the ability score increases I want and the origin feat I want. If I couldn't for some reason, do an old or custom background, I guess I'd probably take Sage here, maybe, but but I'd be annoyed about it. Because, yeah, the origin feat that I really want here is Magic Initiate Wizard, which lets us pick a couple of wizard cantrips and a first level wizard spell, pick the ability score that we want to cast those with, and I really want Ray of Frost on this build. Because when you hit an enemy with it, it does both a d8 of damage, but also slows them by 10 feet until our next turn. But it's not a spell that bards get access to typically, which makes me sad. To be fair, we won't really be using the spell for some time, and if we follow the build as I've outlined, we'll probably only be using it for a couple levels. So it's not necessarily a must-have depending on your table, depending on when the campaign ends, whether or not you're going to be following the build exactly as I lay it out. But you know, it will be a core part of what we do eventually, and I don't want to have to dip into another class to get Ray of Frost. As for the first level spell to pick, I'd go with Shield. I think using our reaction to increase our armor class by 5 for the rest of the round is always a fantastic defensive option. But then the ability score increases I want aren't given us by the Sage background, namely Dexterity and Charisma, right? I'm going to say, assuming point buy as always, let's go a 15 Dex, take a +2 there, a 15 Charisma, and a +1 there, and then a 14 Constitution. Sure, I would have loved to get a Warlock dip early so that we could get Pact of the Blade and be sad, single ability score dependent, right? Focusing just on Charisma. I will do that later, actually, but it was a lot more important as a controller to get to Bard 5 for 3rd level spells as soon as possible, and Bard 6 to really make our whole Gishy controller shtick come together. So we're going to be a little mad and focus on both Dexterity and Charisma for now. I guess I should mention, if you wanted to flip these and maybe just start with like a 15 or 16 Dexterity and a 17 Charisma, I don't think it would be a terrible choice. We'll talk more about it later. As for starting equipment, for armor, we're going medium armor here, so grab some scale mail. We don't have the strength for heavy armor if we don't want to suffer a movement penalty, at least. I'd get a shield as well, and then, yes, as you probably guessed by the title, the whip. Boy, do I love this weapon, and judging by the number of requests I get in the comment section, so do a lot of you. It's just cool, right? I mean, it looks and feels freaking awesome for one, especially for those of us who grew up on Castlevania or Indiana Jones, but also, though it only does a d4 of damage, it has reach, so we can attack with it from 10 feet away, and very importantly, does slashing damage, as we'll discuss later. Best of all, perhaps, it comes with the weapon mastery of slow. And since at Fighter 1 we get weapon masteries, we can take the whip as one of those, and it's awesome. Slow says that when we hit an enemy with the weapon, we can reduce their speed by 10 feet until our next turn. All right, so we're up to 20 feet speed reduction now, potentially with just a single whip attack, right? That's awesome. Thanks to our Frost Giant ability, at least a couple of times a day for now. That's awesome. Now, fighters get 3 weapon masteries, so I'd probably also pick up the longbow here as well, I think, which has the slow property too, if you need a ranged option, though of course you need to put your shield away to use. Alternatively, you could just use Ray of Frost. It won't hit as reliably since it's charisma based, or at least not once we get our dexterity up anyways, or do quite as much damage, but it is easier to just stow your whip and cast Ray of Frost than it would be to get rid of your whip and shield, pull out your bow, right? Fighters also get a fighting style at level 1, and I'm going to say let's go dueling here to get an extra +2 damage to our whip attacks, making the damage from it more equivalent to like a d8 weapon than a d4, which is nice. That said, this character is definitely not a like damage first kind of character. Their focus is on control, and any damage that we do will kind of just be gravy. I'm not even going to like put the build in the spreadsheets to compare it to other damage builds. Similar to what I do with most of my control and support focused builds, right? So if you'd rather take defense, fighting style, or protection, or blind fighting, etc., I wouldn't blame you at all. At Fighter 1, we also get Second Wind, which can give us a nice little D10 plus fighter level heal as a bonus action. We can use it twice per day and recover 1 use of it with a short rest, and that's fantastic. You know who else is fantastic? My channel members. You guys are so awesome. Thank you so much for your support. I could not do this without you. If you are not a member of the channel, you are also fantastic, and I'd love it if you'd consider joining. There's a button down there. It says join. You click on it and it'll just tell you like the perks that you can get by being a member. If you sign up at any level above silver, which is like $2 a month. You get access to all of the perks, and I would just ask that you pay whatever you think it's worth or what you feel like you can. You can get access to the library of write-ups that I create for each of these builds so that you can recreate it yourself a little more easily. You get access to the Discord server filled with many wonderful, amazing, engaging people, and then even access to the live monthly Q&A hangout sessions that we do. Anyways, if you're not interested in becoming a member or don't feel like you can right now or whatever, that's totally fine. I'm glad that you're just here watching, liking, subscribing, all of those things. Also great ways to support the channel, so thanks. Okay, at level 2, yes, with our most important fighter features secured, it is time to get Bard levels. So when we first meet our champion, yeah, they are a Goliath descended from frost giants. They have trained as a martial fighter for whatever reason, but have also inherited, and I think are developing arcane powers associated especially with the cold, the water, the ice, and snow as per their inherited genealogy, right? They tell tales of frozen lands and sing the song of winter to chill, slow, and even freeze their foes solid. And for what it's worth, yeah, I think I'd probably flavor like everything this character did as kind of infused with cold and ice. Maybe our whip even has little ice crystals growing on it that act like little barbs or something. Anyways, as a Bard 1, we get Bardic Inspiration, so we can Charisma modifier times per day with a bonus action inspire our allies so that anytime in the next hour they can add a d6 to a failed d20 test, and then we also get first level Bard spells. And there are many that I would consider: Vicious Mockery and Dissonant Whispers, sure, those Bard specific spells that let you harm and debuff with insults and misgivings, but I'd also want a heal for sure, so Cure Wounds and or Healing Word, both are nice. Fairy Fire is nice for concentration, maybe early on to give advantage on attacks against enemies, but if we're truly a controller, Sleep is worth considering here. And yeah, I'm gonna keep arguing that it's better now than ever before. It might not be quite as powerful at level 1 and like maybe level 2, but after that, old Sleep was largely worthless. Now, Sleep lets you force a wisdom save against enemies in an admittedly small 5-foot radius sphere, though that could theoretically hit up to 4 enemies, right? If they were so kind as to pack nice and tightly for you. More likely it'll only hit 1 or 2, but anyways, it will incapacitate them on a failed wisdom save until the end of their next turn, at which point, if they fail to save again, they're straight up unconscious for a minute, or until they take damage or someone else uses an action to wake them up. It's a strong first level spell, it really is. I do wish it would upcast to impact like a larger radius as you used higher spell slots for it maybe, but oh well. You put enemies into hibernation with an early onset of winter. It's really good. Oh, and don't forget Silvery Barbs. It's really good. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is another strong single target control option if you'd prefer. At level 3, we would be a Bard 2. That means we get Expertise, letting us double our proficiency bonus for skills that we're proficient in, right? 2 of them. If you're the face of the party, you're probably going to want like Persuasion and maybe Deception or Intimidation, but throwing Perception in there is always good too. It's very useful. Anyways, pick your favorites. And then we get Jack of all trades, which lets us add half of our proficiency bonus rounded down to any skill check that we're not already adding our proficiency bonus to. Nice little utility bump. At level 4, we would be a Bard 3, and that means we get our subclass, and we are going with Valor Bard. Of course we are. I told you this was going to be a gish. I love the new Valor Bard so very much. At this level, they just get martial training, which says that we have medium armor, shield, and martial weapon proficiency, which we already had since we started fighter. But then importantly, we can use a weapon as a spellcasting focus to cast spells from our Bard list specifically, which is handy. That said, with the new rules telling us that we can draw or sheath a weapon as part of an attack we make with it before or after the attack, and because we can still interact with an object to do the same once per turn for free as like a free action, right? Having our hands free for spellcasting doesn't worry me nearly as much as it used to. We also get Combat Inspiration here, which gives our allies 2 new ways to use our Bardic Inspiration that we've given them, either as a reaction when they're hit by an attack to add the Bardic Inspiration die roll to their AC, only for that one attack, unfortunately, but still might be nice, or to add the damage they deal after hitting an enemy with an attack themselves. Then we get second level Bard spells, and as a more support focused character especially, we'd want to grab, aid to heal and bolster max hit points for 3 party members, lesser restoration for a little cure all, but there are also some nice second level control spells too. Hold person to paralyze humanoids, suggestion to take at least one enemy pretty much out of the fight if you can't convince them to fight for you, if your DM would allow that suggestion to be considered reasonable, I guess. Depends on how you word it, maybe. Real quick, what about Cloud of Daggers? My original plan with this build was to try and build around Cloud of Daggers. It's a little trickier now to pull off dealing damage with the spell twice on a turn, since it's been changed to deal damage when a target first moves into the area or when they end their turn there now. It won't stop me from using the spell sometimes, of course, like I did with the Dance Bard build a few weeks ago. And it would be cool to pull off here too, since our goal is to just freeze an enemy in place, right? Keeping them from moving at all during their turn. And hey, you could do that with the way that we're building here. But the problem is, we won't be able to both cast the spell and freeze an enemy in place on the same turn unless we were to grab Action Surge, which we could, but it slows everything else down a bit. But worse, we could do this to one target, sure, but after that, without an easy way to move enemies on the battlefield yet, after that first enemy died, we'd probably have to use an action to move Cloud of Daggers, and that's kind of cool that you can do that now, but then we're not making attacks, and besides, the spell really shines if we can push them into it and root them in place, which again, we'll be able to do later, but not until much later. And so it kind of just made me scrap the whole idea and say, you know what? No, this character is a controller first, damage dealer second. So let's just focus on the control stuff. Later, if you want to use the spell to be a big damage dealer, you'll be able to, and I'll talk about it when we get to that point. For now, I say we focus on what we're built for, control. At level 5, we would be a Bard 4, and that means we get a feat. And as I'm sure many of you have guessed, we are going to be taking the Slasher feat. It was one of the reasons that I decided to kind of go dex first on the build, since Slasher is a dexterity or strength half feat and is pretty integral to us doing everything that we want to do with our weapon attacks, namely lock an enemy in place as soon as we can, while still concentrating on a powerful control spell. So in addition to bumping our dexterity to 18, which is nice, Slasher also says that once per turn, when we hit an enemy with an attack that does slashing damage, and our whip does, we can reduce the enemy's speed by 10 feet until the start of our next turn, like all these other abilities say that we're getting. So for those counting at home, we can now combine our Frost Giant Snare, our whip slow mastery, and the Slasher feat to reduce an enemy's speed by 30 feet with one single whip attack, at least a few times per day now, and then 20 feet if we're out of Frost Giant uses, right? And considering that most enemies in D&D 5e only have 30 feet of speed, and most enemies only have melee attack options, that's freaking awesome. Oh, also with Slasher, if we get a critical hit that does slashing damage, they have disadvantage on attack rolls until our next turn. Nice little cherry on top. Things get even better next level though, because at level 6 we would be a Bard 5, and that means, yes, Font of Inspiration for Bardic Inspirations that reset on a short rest, that's great, and don't forget those inspirations are a D8 now instead of a D6, right? But more importantly, especially for this build, Bard 5 means the almighty 3rd level spells, and while yes, things like Catnap, Dispel Magic, and Tiny Hut, among others, are super useful and should be considered, at least eventually, let's focus here on the 3 big control spells, shall we? First up, Fear. Cast as an action in a 30-foot cone, everyone in the area has to succeed on a wisdom save or drop what they're holding and be frightened. If frightened, not only can they not move towards you, right, but they have to take the dash action on their turn to move away from you by the safest route. They don't even get to make a save unless they end their turn without line of sight on you. That's pretty incredible. It will likely take targets out of the fight for at least 2 turns as they run back to get into the fight, right? And often longer than that. Oh, and I'm totally flavoring this spell like I've maybe become an actual frost giant or some sort of abominable snow monster in the eyes of the enemies that they're fleeing in terror from, right? Next up, Hypnotic Pattern. This is cast as an action in a 30-foot cube. Situationally better, but not always. Those in the cube who fail their wisdom save are charmed and straight up incapacitated with a speed of 0. No save on subsequent rounds, but the spell just flat out ends if they take damage or someone uses their action to shake them out of their stupor. Flavor-wise, I think this is like a big burst of ice crystals that have a hypnotizing kaleidoscope of color, maybe. But you know what I think I'd probably be casting more than either of those two spells, as great as they are? Yeah, slow. I mean, first of all, slowing enemies is kind of our thing, right? It's our jam. But also, while straight up incapacitating or causing enemies to flee is potentially more powerful, there are a lot of enemies in the game that are immune to either fear or charm, if not both, especially as we get to higher levels, right? Secondly, due to the area of effect thing, with fear and hypnotic pattern, you might either inadvertently get some allies caught in the spell's area of effect or have to place the spell's area in a less optimal way, hitting fewer enemies than you'd like in order to keep your allies from suffering from the spell's effects. With slow, you just straight up choose 6 creatures in a larger 40-foot cube area to make a wisdom save or cut their speed in half, give them a -2 to their armor class and dexterity saves, keep them from taking reactions, forcing them to choose between an action or a bonus action on their turn, and even if they have multi-attack, limiting them to a single attack per turn. Finally, it can even force enemies to fail their spellcasting. Now, they do automatically get to make a save at the end of each turn when affected by slow, and yeah, again, it doesn't totally just take them out of the fight, but I don't know. Maybe I just like the fact that it still keeps the fight a little interesting, right? Since enemies still get to do something, it's not totally take them out of the fight altogether, but at the same time so greatly weakens them that your party should still have a really easy time just mopping them up. Flavor-wise too, it's kind of the most on point, I think. And for me, this is I cast the spell and I'm just chilling the very core of my enemies, freezing up even the blood in their veins, right? Causing them to just shiver and become lethargic and clumsy as magical frostbite starts to overwhelm them. In the end, yes, I do think we should try to pack all 3 of these spells in our repertoire, sacrificing lower level spells even so that you can pull out the right one for the situation, and it's going to be devastating for your foes. All right, at level 6, I usually pause to do a damage report for damage and tank builds, right? I don't really do that with support focused builds, but instead I do like to do kind of a tactics report to at least discuss what our options are and what we should be doing in combat. On round 1 here, yeah, we're throwing out our big control spell, hampering or locking down as many enemies as possible, maybe giving an ally Bardic Inspiration with our bonus action. And then on round 2, you'll find the melee enemy who made their save or wasn't in range of the spell's area in the first place and whip them from 10 feet away, applying your Frost Giant Snare plus a little extra damage, as well as the slow from your Whip Mastery and the Slasher feat to hopefully just freeze them in place. If you're out of Frost Giant uses, or if the enemy has 40 feet of move speed, right, just whip them and back up 20 feet or so to keep them from being able to reach you on their turn. Make sure you call out as well to your melee allies to just leave that one alone for now and focus instead on other stragglers. On subsequent rounds, just rinse and repeat, hopefully letting your allies pick off targets one by one until the battle is won. And our damage isn't half bad. A d4 plus 2 for dueling, plus 4 for dexterity, plus a d6 for the Frost Giant attack when we use it. It's nothing to write home about, but 12 damage at this level, considering the way that you're totally locking down so much of the battlefield, is great. We're in a pretty fun and powerful place at the moment. But it's really the next level, level 7, when you become a Bard 6, where things really start to come together for the build. We hit our stride even better in a couple more levels at level 9, but 7 gets us at least to where the core concept of the build really feels complete, because as a Valor Bard 6, we get extra attack. And as most of you know, it's not just any old extra attack, but the Blade Singer's extra attack, right? Letting us replace one of our weapon attacks with a cantrip if we want, which means that we can both make a slashing, slowing whip attack and hit them with Ray of Frost to slow them by 30 feet now with a single action, even without the Frost Giant's slow, saving those Frost Giant charges for when we're fighting enemies with 40 feet or more of move speed, yeah? And that is truly going to cover the vast majority of enemies in the new Monster Manual, and that feels awesome. And I wish we could have gotten here by level 6, but yeah, just wasn't possible. Now, let me mention an alternative build here that some of you are probably thinking about. We could have just gone straight Eldritch Knight instead, right? By this level, level 7, they would also be able to replace an attack with a cantrip, but would have the benefit of not needing to multiclass, not even needing to take Magic Initiate as their origin feat, right? Because they could just grab Ray of Frost, and even picking up an additional feat along the way at Fighter 6, yeah? Later, they would probably be doing more damage by getting a third attack even at Fighter 11. in the end, it kind of boils down to this. Do you want to do a little more damage on this character, or do you want to be like the best controller you can be? Because the big drawback with Eldritch Knights, of course, is that they are 1/3 casters. Yeah, by level 7, they only have 2nd level spells. And while like Web can be a potent form of control, it's not as strong as those 3rd level options that we've discussed generally. And Eldritch Knights wouldn't get those 3rd level spells until level 13, to say nothing of the even better higher level stuff that we are going to be picking up. Feel free to go full Eldritch Knight if you want. It's not a bad option. I prefer the Valor Bard with a fighter dip route personally. But at level 8, we're going Warlock. I mean, of course, and obviously, going back to Bard is a great idea. Magical secrets and higher level spells means getting Wall of Force, among other things, one of the best control spells in the game. To say nothing of the Dominate spells, Hold Monster, Mass Suggestion later. These are fantastic and amazing reasons to take Bard levels through to like the end of the character, no question. But you know that. And I suppose, to me, that route is maybe slightly less interesting. I love the idea of this character being a Gish, like I've said, a control Gish, though, a lockdown spell sword, a spell whip, right? And I guess I kind of want to like lean into that. I'd like to see if there's more controlling and freezing we could do with our attacks outside of our big area of effect control spells. So I think especially if you can play with older 5e content, specifically stuff from Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, if both of these books cover everything, then how come they have different stuff in them? I don't know. But if you can use those books, then there are some very compelling reasons to take some Warlock levels here. If you can't, or you don't want to, or you just want to stick with Bard, you should. Let's explore what we can do with a little more multiclassing instead, shall we? So, at this point in our character's career, this martial-focused dirge of winter has decided to make a pact with an otherworldly being. Perhaps this was part of your character's story all along, or maybe something from the cold deeps or frozen peaks has taken notice of your skill and dedication to the darkness of winter, to your chilled heart, and has decided to grant you additional power. Maybe it's a kraken, or maybe it's an ancient white dragon, or the ruler of all frost giants. But yes, whatever your reason, we are taking some Warlock levels here. As a Warlock 1, then, we get Eldritch Invocations, of course, and while I eventually would love to get Pact of the Blade, currently our dexterity is higher than our charisma. It doesn't really make sense for us right now, so I would just say grab Eldritch Mind for now, so we can have advantage on concentration checks, always useful, much appreciated. And then, as for first level Warlock spells that we get here, I think Armor of Agathis is both a solid choice and also thematically appropriate, right? Covering yourself in an icy shield that gives you temporary hit points and returns cold damage to melee attackers who hit you. Other than that, though, yeah, we are going to be taking Eldritch Blast for sure. It is such a great cantrip. Firing 2 beams now, since we hit character level 5, right, that do a d10 of force damage each. Here's hoping that your DM lets you flavor those as like icy blasts, or, I mean, you know, not necessarily to do cold damage, just like maybe it's like a fast moving ball of ice or something, I don't know. Anyways, what makes Eldritch Blast so good, really, is the fact that at level 9, when we're a Warlock 2, we can buff it with some really great invocations, right? So we could pick up Repelling Blast and Lance of Lethargy. Now, in the 2024 Player's Handbook, Repelling Blast and other invocations let us decide which cantrip we want it to impact. So we could, say, make Repelling Blast work on Ray of Frost if we wanted, but I think it's better with Eldritch Blast here since it lets us push an enemy 10 feet each time they're hit with the cantrip, and since Eldritch Blast fires multiple beams, that's potentially 20 feet of pushing and more later, right? That said, since the Lance of Lethargy invocation comes from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, it's not in the new Player's Handbook, so if you can't use it, sure, make it a Repelling Ray of Frost. But if you can use it, Lance of Lethargy is great because it lets Eldritch Blast slow by an additional 10 feet. Now, what about Agonizing Blast? Adding our charisma modifier to the damage of Eldritch Blast especially means a decent amount of extra damage, right? If you wanted to drop Eldritch Mind here for Agonizing Blast, go for it. Maybe especially if you wanted to lean into being a solid damage dealer first and like a controller second. Since now, yes, we could, if we wanted, throw down Cloud of Daggers and fairly easily push enemies into it and freeze them in place, so they took damage from Cloud of Daggers twice in a round. Let's say on our turn that we were to like Frost Giant Whip, then fire 2 agonizing Eldritch Blast beams to knock someone into a 3rd level, upcast Cloud of Daggers, and then froze them there in place, right? Over the course of an entire round, we would do 13d4 plus 2d10 plus 1d6 plus 12 damage. Almost 60 damage on average if everything worked. That's pretty solid, like tier 1 levels of damage at this level. And our enemy would just be stuck there, getting sliced up on their turn without being able to get out of what surely would be flavored as like spinning shards of deadly icicles or something. This would be a really fun tactic to just pull out once in a while. Maybe if you get bored of controlling all the time. And so yeah, hooray for options. Don't forget, Warlocks also get Magical Cunning at Warlock 2 as well, which simply lets us recover a Pact Magic, specifically, right, Warlock spell slot, after a 1-minute ritual that we can do once per day. Not bad if we don't have time for a short rest, but we need to get just like 1 spell slot back. Okay, at level 9, for a tactics report, we've seen some nice gains to our control capabilities since last check. I think we're still throwing down a potent control spell on round 1, but on round 2 and thereafter, we can just put some serious lockdown on even fast-moving enemies. If we needed to, we could Frost Giant Whip for 30 feet of slow with a single hit, and then push them 20 feet away with Eldritch Blast and slow them 10 more feet with Lance of Lethargy for 40 feet of slowing power. Even if they have 50 feet of speed, which few enemies have, and they were to dash on their turn, they wouldn't even be able to get to within melee range of you, if you started your whip attack from 10 feet away anyways. That's kind of amazing. And I appreciate the additional utility damage and self-preservation options that we've picked up along the way to boot. But at level 10, it gets even better, because we would be a Warlock 3, and that means we get our subclass. And yes, if you can use stuff from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, that means we could be a Fathomless Warlock, taking our slowing power up to 11, right? Now, a quick note. Some people may be wondering how you incorporate an old Warlock subclass that hasn't been updated for the new Player's Handbook into the 2024 rules. Warlocks used to get their subclasses at level 1, right? It's so confusing. It's actually not that complicated. Just take your subclass feature at level 3 now instead. That's pretty much it. So at level 3 now, Fathomless Locks get 2 features. Gift of the Sea gives us a swim speed of 40 feet, dang, and lets us breathe underwater, double dang. I certainly hope you can use this in your campaign once in a while. The premier feature though here, of course, is Tentacle of the Deeps, which says that proficiency bonus times per day. As a bonus action, we can summon a spectral, let's call it maybe an icy or watery tentacle with a 10-foot reach, so on point, that we can use on our turn with a bonus action to move up to 30 feet if we want it to, and then make an attack, using our charisma, of course, to deal 1d8 of cold damage and, yes, reduce the enemy's speed by 10 feet until our turn. That is potentially 50 feet of speed reduction we can throw down now, immobilizing all but the very fastest of enemies. We are peak Cool Whip now in all of our delicious hydrogenated oil glory. We also get 2nd level Warlock spells here, and I'd just focus on stuff Bards didn't get access to, right? Misty Step, Spider Climb, etc. At level 11, as much as I'd like to get back to Bard, I mean, we need that feat at Warlock 4, right? Our charisma has been languishing at 16 all this time. It's actually one of, if maybe not my least favorite thing about this build. We got to get that up to 18 for sure, so let's do that here, bumping our charisma with our ability score increase to 18. And then don't forget, character level 11, Eldritch Blast now fires 3 beams when we use it. That's great. More pushing power, more chances to hit and slow, right? And at level 12, as much as I'd like to get back to Bard, I think we're going to go Fighter 2. I know, believe me, I hate it as much as you do. But listen, Action Surge is so good. It is so good. Not just for those who want to do burst damage, but also for cool whipping controllers who want to lock down the battlefield as effectively and quickly as possible. This is by no means necessary. I just have a feeling that in-game, it's going to feel so much better on round 1 to like throw down your big control spell, then Action Surge, since that lets us get an extra action on our turn once per short rest, right? And lock down one more enemy with our Whip and Cantrip and Tentacle who wasn't in the spell's area of effect, or maybe who made their save, right? I think it's just going to make our opening round so much more effective and impactful. And we already had 1 level of fighter anyways. It's just one more little teeny weeny level, right? I don't know. It would be even better if we could push an enemy into place first with our action and Repelling Blast to get them into the spell's area that we're about to cast, then Action Surge and cast our control spell. But remember, you can't use that second action from Action Surge to take the magic action anymore. So you would need to cast the spell with your first action, then Action Surge and attack. As a result, this feels a little less necessary getting Action Surge here, so sure, skip it, go back to Bard instead if you want, but especially if you want to occasionally do the Cloud of Daggers thing, this kind of feels like a must-have. Cast Cloud of Daggers, then Action Surge and push an enemy into it while freezing them in place. It means you're going to double up on the damage from the spell, at least right on round 1. So good. Oh, and don't forget, fighters now get Tactical Mind at Fighter 2 as well, which lets us spend a use of our second wind on a failed ability check, which will be nice once in a while, potentially turning that into a success. And if it still fails, then you don't even use the second wind, which is great. But at level 13, okay, fine. We have delayed Bard levels way too long, so let's be a Bard 7. We want those better spells and spell slots, to say nothing of other nice features like the new and improved Counter Charm, for example, which we get here, which now lets us use our reaction when we or an ally fails a save against being charmed or frightened, letting the roll be made again, but this time with advantage. So you're actually re-rolling, but like 2 more dice to try and succeed. Pretty nice. We also get 4th level spells here, and I'd for sure want like Dimension Door for a bigger teleport that lets you bring a friend, and I'm a sucker for Ralitham's Psychic Lance for like some burst damage and a round of incapacitation, a nice little 1-2 combo there. But the best control spells here would be Compulsion, Confusion, and sure, Polymorph, though I think most of the time you're going to be better off with Slow Fear or Hypnotic Pattern, personally. Okay, we should check in with a tactics report at level 13. Since last check, we've increased our charisma, added even more freezing power and damage with our Tentacle of the Deeps, some nice utility and support and quality of life features, and the ability to get all of our control stuff going, or damage, should we choose, right from round 1. It's really, really solid. At level 14, we'd be a Bard 8, and that means we get another feat, so we can finally cap our charisma at 20. That feels great. And maybe now that we've finally gotten our charisma above our dexterity, right, at level 15, I think I'd probably take one more little level in Warlock and be a Warlock 5. You don't have to do this now, or at all for that matter. But now that we've got our charisma capped, right, I really like the idea of being able to use charisma for both our spellcasting and our whip attacks. It's something that I was originally hoping to do with this build right at level 1 or 2, but with the slasher feat being so important to our tactics, we weren't going to be able to bump our charisma until much later anyway, so it just didn't make a lot of sense. But now it finally does. However, in order to swap out one of our invocations for Pact of the Blade, so that we can do that, right, we need to gain a level in Warlock. Yeah, we can't just like swap out our invocations with a long rest or anything. And it just so happens that taking one more level in Warlock actually gets us 2 more invocations, which is awesome, as well as 3rd level Warlock spell slots that reset on a short rest, right? Which is more awesome, so we can really just be slowing with Abandon, or hypnotizing, or frightening, yeah? I might rather wait to go Warlock 5 until after I got Magical Secrets, I'm not quite sure, but I'm gonna put it here just to say, hey, this is something you could do, and there are good reasons for doing so. So yes, for the 2 new invocations we get, I think I'd take Pact of the Blade, so that we can use Charisma for our attack stat, for our whip, right? And then I'd probably get Agonizing Blast if I didn't have it, or take Eldritch Mind back if I dropped it earlier. So, thus, for my 5 total invocations, I'd have Repelling Blast, Lance of Lethargy, Pact of the Blade, Eldritch Mind, and Agonizing Blast. Part of me would love to have Grasp of Hadar too, so I could pull enemies if I needed instead of just push them, but I don't know. Our damage can actually be pretty decent now, especially with 3 Eldritch Blast Beams and a capped Charisma. Agonizing Blast is adding 15 damage on our turn. That's solid. As for the 3rd level Warlock spells that we would get here, we should pick up Counter Spell for sure. Fly is great. Spirit Shroud isn't bad if we wanted to add damage, but of course, we could have taken Conjure Minor Elementals at Bard 7. I didn't even mention it. And with a whip attack and 3 Eldritch Blast Beams, yeah, that's a ton of damage if we start upcasting conjure minor elementals especially, but I kind of assume it's probably not allowed at your table in its current form, and I can't really imagine concentrating on Spirit Shroud with this build. We're here to control, not add a few d8s of damage on our attacks, yeah. One spell I'd be sure to grab above all here is Hunger of Hadar. It's kind of like the darkness spell on steroids. It covers a 20-foot sphere in magical darkness and makes it difficult terrain that blinds those inside and deals up to 4d6 damage per round in like cold and acid. If you can lock down potentially multiple enemies inside it, it can be a nice like have your cake and eat it too option to both damage and control, though if you were going to rely on this spell, I'd be sure to grab Devil's Sight as one of your invocations so you can see inside of it, right, to attack and freeze with advantage those trapped within. Would be a really fun play. Great tactic. At level 16, though, it's time to go back to Bard. We'd be a Bard 9 giving us expertise round 2. Go ahead and pick your favorites there. You are a really great skill monkey here. And then, yes, 5th level Bard spells. The standout control options, I think, are Dominate Person to like just take control of a humanoid, not just incapacitate them, right? Hold Monster to paralyze anything. But I'd also consider grabbing Greater Restoration for a more powerful cure-all, Raise Dead, because we don't get Revivify, and you can never have too many Resurrects, especially these days. And then, yeah, one of my favorites, Synaptic Static, for Fireball-like psychic damage that targets intelligence saving throws, and also puts a strong -1d6 penalty on your foes that they have to subtract from all attack rolls, ability checks, and even concentration checks. It's such a great spell. But the real creme de la creme comes to us at level 17, Bard 10, because that is when we finally get Magical Secrets, which says that from this point forward, whenever the prepared spells number in our spell table increases, we can choose the spells from Bard, Cleric, Wizard, or Druid spell lists now, and that those spells count as Bard spells for us. Also, anytime we replace a spell from our Bard spell list, which we can do once when we level up, right? We can replace it with a spell from any of those lists. Yes, this is a nerf compared to the 2014 Magical Secrets in that we can no longer access Warlock, Pally, and Ranger spells, but it's a big buff in that we can get a lot more spells from other classes' spell lists and a lot more often. I think it's a net gain overall, though I know some people are sad about losing Swift Quiver and Banishing Smite and Fine Steed, etc. As for the spells we want here, yes, at the top of the list is Wall of Force, which lets us just plop an invisible force field down in the form of either walls or a dome that enemies don't get to save against. They're just stuck behind unless they can teleport or have the Disintegrate spell, right? It's not foolproof, but it is against most enemies, and I love it. Finally, Eldritch Blast fires 4 beams now when we use it at level 17. Okay, Tactics report at level 17. What have we gained since last check? A lot. A capped charisma modifier, more Eldritch Blast damage, tons of utility, and above all, more fantastic control options in the form of Hunger of Hadar and Wall of Force. So, I've got a lot of things to say in the final thoughts section here. Let's get into it. The main question I'm guessing some of you might have is, should we really wait this long to get Magical Secrets? We could have just beelined to Bard 10 and grabbed Wall of Force by character level 11 with a single level fighter tip, right? I guess I'd just say, again, go that route if you want. Personally, yeah, I think what we gained was worth it. Pushing a lot more slowing power, better spell slots that reset on a short rest, other good, if maybe not quite as good control spells, Action Surge for a better start to our domination of the battlefield right on round 1, way better damage thanks largely to Eldritch Blast, boatloads of utility. In the end, again, it kind of all depends on what you want this character to be. A powerful spellcaster who also does a little slowing with a whip attack and a Ray of Frost? If so, sure, beeline to Bard 10 after a level of fighter. But I just find that what we ended up with is a heck of a lot more compelling, interesting, and fun to play in-game personally, with pushing, tentacle whipping, a lot more damage. And if I'm being honest, I don't know that we're missing out on that much control power by delaying Wall of Force. Yes, it's an amazing spell, but between Slow, Fear, and Hypnotic Pattern, plus later Hunger of Hadar, we can cover most of our bases most of the time. And yeah, as good as it is, it's not like Wall of Force is a perfect catch-all either. Plenty of enemies have teleport, fewer have disintegrate, but it exists, and you might not be able to get more than 1 or 2 trapped behind it anyways, especially if they can fly or they're like huge, right? So Even if you had Wall of Force earlier on, you'd likely find yourself using one of those other control spells anyways, whether because you're out of 5th level spell slots or because the other spells would just do the job as well as or better than Wall of Force would, right? To me, the bigger frustration with this build was having to delay Pact of the Blade, honestly. If the slasher feat gave a bump to charisma, then there's no issue. Alternatively, maybe you're okay delaying slasher for a while until like after you cap your charisma. So, if you wanted to go like Fighter 1, then Warlock 1, then Bard levels, and focus on charisma, and not take the slasher feat until later, you'd be giving up 10 feet of slow early on, delaying that Valor Bard extra attack to both slow with your whip and your cantrip by yet another level, right? But maybe that would be worth it to you. To me, it just felt like the thing I most wanted to build around with this character was slowing with my attacks, and to make that happen as early as possible, Slasher and Valor Bard extra attack were more important. But it did leave our spell save DC languishing a bit until later in our career, right? So yeah, it wasn't an easy decision, and it had me spinning in circles for hours on end as I was trying to put this all together. But in the end, I'm really pleased with where we ended up. I think this character would be so dang fun to play in-game. You would just be an absolute terror on the battlefield. Not for the crazy damage you'd be doing, which is respectable, especially later, but for the way you would just annihilate enemies' will to even keep fighting. Being immobilized, incapacitated, slowed, and shoved around, your allies will freaking love having you on their team, making life so easy for them as they get to dogpile on 1 or 2 enemies at a time, while the rest of the bad guys just look on in frustration and terror, frozen to the bone. So yeah, that's the build for the week. I hope you enjoyed it. I loved putting it together, even though it gave me fits. I love you guys. Thank you so much for all that you do for me and for the channel. I so appreciate it. I hope you have a fantastic day and a really great week. And if you don't, man, I hope you hang in there. Don't give up, okay? I hope that you will do good and that you'll be kind and that I see you again very soon. But until then, take care. Bye. When a problem comes along, you must whip it before the cream stays out too long. You must whip it when something's going wrong. You must whip it. Now whip it into shape. Shape it up. Oh, Devo. It's so weird. Crack that whip. Oh, shoot. I mean, how can I not sing that song, though, for the video today, right? It's gotta be. I've done other, like, whip-focused builds. Did I sing that on those? I don't know. There was the Whippoorwill. There was there was, like, a control. Was it a Blade Singer? Using a whip, an Artificer, year and a half ago in the summer. Anyways, I don't know. If I sang that already, then sorry. Whip it good. Oh, the vest. I got the Bard vest going. This is about as bardy as I can dress, I think. But the collar's bugging me. You might find me adjusting it periodically, and then I'm sure Nox will just take that and turn it into just a montage of me fiddling with my vest for outtakes. So that's gonna be fun. Until the start of our next turn, like we're just say just do a little zippy zip. All right, I'll just say it from the spell. Oh, I have stage fright. You know what's happening? I know that my son is going to be editing this video and putting stuff in the outtakes, and if I sneezed on camera, he would for sure include it, and I would just look ridiculous. Stupid sneeze. One more collar adjust for the outtakes.